I'm Teresa Tomeo, and Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders starts now.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
Why do Catholics worship Mary?
What's stopping you?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest? Where is purgatory in the Bible?
What's stopping you?
I think the Pope has too much authority.
What's stopping you? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters, those of you who have questions about the Catholic faith. Maybe you're trying to figure things out before making the plunge and actually be becoming a Catholic. Or perhaps you're not really interested in becoming a Catholic, but you still have questions about the faith that you would like to get, the correct answers from. We are here to help. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Outside of North America, you'll want to dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. And for those of you who are watching on TV today, you can participate as well. The email address, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Well, we have the A-team in place, ready to take your calls right now. Charles Beery is our producer. Ryan Penny is our phone screener. That's the first voice that you'll hear. And Jeff Burson is working social media. So if you have any questions that you may want to pose via YouTube or Facebook, we are streaming there right now. I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing decent, thank you.
Glad to hear that. Here is an email that we received from Philip. Philip says, after a discussion with my young son, who has recently been studying ancient Greece at school, I would be grateful if you could outline the merits and wisdom of the belief in one God over that of many gods, such as in Greek or Norse mythology. Thanks, Philip.
Absolutely. Thanks, Philip. Really appreciate the question. So let's distinguish three positions. One would be Christian monotheism. Another would be what you might call henotheism, which would be the ancient belief that there are many gods, but one is top dog, so to speak. One is the chief god. And then your garden variety polytheists. Well, in the case of both henotheists and polytheists, both of them are dependent on pre-existing natural causes, right? They are products of the universe and its constituent parts, not its creators.
Okay.
The buck doesn't stop with them. And so that's just not what Christians mean by the word God.
All right.
That's not what we mean by the word God. In the Christian context, the word God means the first cause, primo principio, right? That from which all things proceed. So, as a matter of orienting our activity in life and our highest aims, the worship of the gods, whether they be conceived polytheistically or henotheistically, is a servitude, a kind of enslavement to a divine benefactor from whom we hope to acquire some kind of spiritual or material goods. But that's completely different from the human impulse to, say, understand the bases of human morality or real happiness, or the nature and origin of the universe, or how to engage our intellect to understand the intelligibility of things and the whole world. And so the activities of religion on the one hand, and science, philosophy, investigation, and morality on the other are two different realms.
Okay.
You see. In what happened with the advent of Christianity is the Christians understood polytheism and henotheism and said, that's not us. And when they looked at the ancient Greek world, they said, okay, you've got the people that are involved in worshiping the gods. Then you have people that are actually trying to understand the underlying structure of the universe and our place in it, the big structure, the deep structure, and how human morality might fit into that. That's a different kind of activity. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. Okay. We're involved in the second kind of activity, actually trying to understand the underlying structure of the universe and the ultimate vocation of the human person in relationship to that ultimate reality. And so out of true monotheism, out of Christian monotheism, emerge things like natural science, the scientific revolution, the doctrine of human rights, all of the institutions and developments of modernity in the West that we take for granted as great cultural goods to be exported to the entire world. These are the fruits of monotheism in history.
Okay.
Christian monotheism specifically.
Okay, very good. We thank you for your email, Philip. Here's one more. This is from Diana. I've been told that Catholics complicate a simple faith. How do I respond?
Absolutely. Yeah, we complicate the stew out of it. Right. In a number of ways. At one level, the Catholic faith can be thought of very simply. What's the essence of the Catholic faith? Love God and love your neighbor.
Yep.
Bingo. That's it. That's the whole shooting match. And that's hard to do. And so we add one invocation. Help! Love God, love neighbor, ask for God's help. You get those three elements, and you've got moral theology, you got spiritual theology, all right, are wrapped up in those two. And then you can add doctrine and worship to that if you realize that, hey, actually God does reach down and give us some help. He came in the person of his Son. There you've got all your dogmatic theology wrapped up in one sentence. God became a man so men could become gods. And I meet him in the sacraments. So moral theology, dogmatic theology, spiritual theology, sacramental theology. Boom. I just summarized it for you in one fell swoop. Very simple.
Sure did.
Right. But all of them are subject to an infinite elaboration because life is complicated and humans are complicated and life is beautiful. And we have intellects, and we can investigate scientifically and philosophically and culturally. We can elaborate forms. We can express those simple truths in a myriad of ways across cultures over 2,000 years. And the beauty of that development is simply what we call Catholic tradition.
I'm just wondering if what Diane is talking about here is unnecessary complication. Could that be?
Well, I'm sure she might. All right. What if I said, I'm not going to complicate my marriage. I'm going to keep it really simple. I'm going to tell my wife once that I love her and be done with it.
Ooh, we don't recommend that.
I wouldn't get very far, right?
No.
The whole drama of the relationship is how many sort of infinite permutations of this can evolve over the course of our entire life. How many ways can I say I love you?
Yeah. That's where I want to be. Hey, Diana, thank you so much for your email. In a moment, we'll be talking with Justice. He's 11 years old and listening to us in Big Bear City, California. We've got a line open for you as well, 833-288-EWTN.
Father Robert Spitzer.
First of all, you will get a much deeper awareness of your faith, much deeper awareness of the evidence for your faith, explanations of tough theological issues, how science and reason and faith come together, and above all, a deeper awareness of how to practice your faith and how to live it.
Father Spitzer's Universe with Father Robert Spitzer. Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
The Reason for Our Hope with Father Larry Richards.
I've been ordained 18 years by God's grace, and I've dealt with a lot of people as they're dying. And some people are very afraid. Fear of death is the number one fear. That what fear of death does is makes us slaves. When you sin, you're fighting against death. You don't want to die to yourself. So if it's a sexual temptation, you give into it. Why? Because I don't want to die to myself. If it's a temptation to greed, you give into it. Why? Because I don't want to die to myself. If it's a temptation to gluttony, you give into it. Why? Because I don't want to die to myself. So what happens is this fear of death makes us slaves. And we keep stuck into slavery. Again, Jesus says, anyone who sins is a slave to sin. And so you can either decide to spend your life in slavery or spend your life in freedom.
It's called a communion here on EWTN. Glad that you're with us today. And if you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin this time with Justice. He is 11 years old and listening to us in Big Bear City on the EWTN app. Hey, Justice, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Dr. Anders.
Hi, Justice. How are you?
Good, and you?
I'm fine, thank you. What can I do for you today?
Well, thank you for taking my call.
What's up,
Certainly.
Justice?
What's your question?
My question is, did God intend for the Protestant churches to break away from the Catholic Church?
Okay, thanks. Let me answer it this way, if I could. In your house, I imagine that your parents have rules for you to follow. And they may, for example, say, you are not allowed to go take a cookie from the cookie jar without permission. Maybe you're too big for a rule like that. When you were younger, maybe they said, don't take a cookie from the cookie jar without permission. And if they caught you doing it, they probably sent you to your room without a cookie. All right? So it was against the rules to take a cookie, and they didn't want you to do it. But imagine, I think you probably can, imagine one day your mom is, maybe she's in the living room. I don't know where your living room is, but let's suppose it's attached to your kitchen. And she's got kind of a line of sight into the kitchen, but you don't know she's in there. And you're coming from the den, and you're eyeing that cookie jar, and she sees you thinking about it. So she says, I'm going to sit back and see what Justice does. I'm going to see if he's got the wherewithal to resist temptation even when he thinks I am not looking. And lo and behold, Justice goes and gets his hand in the cookie jar. Now, she saw it happening, right? Mm-hmm. She watched you walk into the kitchen. She saw you lift the lid. And all along, she's just waiting to see what goes down, because maybe you'll put the lid back and have second thoughts and walk off. But she waits for you to actually lift that cookie and start munching on it. Then all of a sudden, she shows up and says, Justice, what's with the cookie? Did she want you to get the cookie? Well, at one level, no. But at another level, she wanted you to be exposed to the possibility so you could test your will, see if you could resist temptation, morally develop, grow, and maybe actually she'd never had an opportunity to enforce the rule with discipline, which she also knew was necessary for your moral development. And it's a mild discipline. Hand me the cookie and go spend, half an hour with your coloring pages or something. I don't know. All right, so that's not a great analogy, but it shows how it's possible for a benevolent authority, a loving God or a loving parent, to foresee, know that something's going to take place, permit it to take place, maybe in a certain extent even create the conditions where it could take place without actually directly willing that it take place. Why? Because that authority, be it God, be it your parents, has something they want to accomplish. Right? Through that human fault, God can bring about some greater good. That's the case with everything humans do that's not the best. Anytime we sin, well, God could have stepped in there and stopped me from sinning. He could stop me from sinning. Knock me dead, right? But he gives me that freedom so that I can develop morally as a person, maybe suffer the consequences of my actions, learn something in consequence, and over time grow deeper, more deeply in love with him and a better person, if I'm ultimately a recipient of his grace. And the same thing emerges over the course of human history. Human history is kind of sloppy and ugly, and there are wars and fights, and people split, and all kinds of nasty stuff happens. But you can kind of see over time through that messy process God allowing to develop some very good things in human culture. And so he uses human mistakes, human difficulties, human problems to bring about purposes that he knows that maybe we don't see at the time. So someone said one time that God writes straight with crooked lines, and we're the crooked lines.
Love that. Justice, thanks so much for your call. We hope that's helpful for you. And that opens up a line for you now here on EWTN's Call to Communion, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. It's Call to Communion here on EWTN Radio. Let's go now to Merle in Toronto. And Merle is checking us out today on YouTube, and a first-time caller as well. Merle, what's on your mind today?
Okay, my sister is divorced. And then my aunt, who is the youngest sister of my father died. My divorced sister married my aunt's husband. Is that spiritual incest?
Okay, so she married an uncle to whom she is related by marriage, but not by physical consanguinity.
Is that right, Merle?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, that's a good question. I can tell you with certainty that in biblical times, in like the letters of St. Paul, for example, that would certainly have been considered incest. I am not actually up to date on in the current code of canon law of the Catholic Church. There are degrees of consanguinity defining like at what point does it constitute incest. I'm not actually sure right now what the law says. This would be the law of the Catholic Church on that particular question. I'm going to consult with a canonist. I don't actually know off the top of my head. I do know that would have been considered incestuous in first century Jewish society. I'm not actually sure what the status of that is in the current Code of Canon Law.
Interesting. Merle, thanks so much for your call. Let's go now to Ray in Indianapolis, also checking us out today on YouTube. Hey, Ray, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Dr. Anders. Thanks for taking my call. I had a question for you regarding Lumen Gentium 14.
Okay.
This is a statement that's directed to the Catholic faithful. At the end of the paragraph, it says, "Whosoever, therefore, knowing that the Catholic Church was made necessary by Christ, would refuse to enter or to remain in it, could not be saved." So here's my motivation for asking the question. I was confirmed into the Church, Catholic Church, a few years ago, along with my entire family. Due to various reasons, they've gone back to our previous Protestant church. And by my trying to remain a faithful Catholic, I really caused them a tremendous amount of suffering because we no longer have family unity now. And I don't want to hurt my family, but if I leave the Catholic Church for their sake to rejoin the Protestant church, is my eternal salvation in jeopardy?
Thanks. I appreciate the question. And I'm very sensitive to your dilemma. And I'm sensitive because I've been in your position. And I'm a convert, as you may know, to the Catholic Church. And my conversion occasioned some bitter difficulties with members of my own family and friends and relation. And hadn't entirely cured all of those, all right? So why then did I become Catholic, knowing that it would cause trouble? Well, ultimately because I had to be obedient to conscience. And as the apostles said, we have to obey God rather than men. And Christ himself anticipated this possibility when he said, if anyone loves spouses, wives, husbands, fields, lands, children, parents, more than me, he cannot be my disciple. So this has been part and parcel of the Catholic faith since day one, that Christ said, I didn't come to bring peace but a sword, to turn the members of a family against their own household. That's harsh. That's truth. That's reality, all right? And so we have to face that difficulty square and say, yeah, my following Christ, in accordance with my conscience and the truth as I understand it, may require me to take a position that's opposed by members of my family. I don't have a choice. Now, there are things we can do to soften the blow, and that's where I think you ought to spend your time thinking about it. If you were to leave the Catholic faith in order to make peace, you would not make peace. You would not make peace. For one, you would not be at peace.
That's exactly right.
You would be at odds with your own conscience. I can remember myself sitting for months in the worship services of non-Catholic organizations, completely and utterly disengaged. Utterly disengaged. And sort of disgusted with myself. Yeah. And I knew I was there for the sake of, family unity or some such thing. But it was a lie. And I knew I was lying by my actions. So I found it, eventually it led me into a dark period of agnosticism, which is not, that's not to be, you shouldn't be surprised. If you walk away from the manifestation of divine truth that you know to be true, and you try to deliberately settle for what you know is second best, your emotions and your will are not going to get engaged, and so your act of faith is going to dissolve in your very hands, and you may end up losing the faith altogether. And I can remember, my wife, who wasn't sympathetic to my plight, but saw the deterioration of my spiritual life, exhorting me one time, and she said, "David, you have to talk to our children about morality in terms of Jesus, and not like pop culture figures." Because I couldn't even bring myself to talk to them about Christ, because I couldn't do it in the terms of the religion that we were practicing with a good conscience. And so I was like, well, you know how Obi-Wan Kenobi is a noble character. We should be like that. And I was like, no. It's not what would Obi-Wan do. It's what would Jesus do. You know? And I was casting around for some way to have a spiritual, moral relationship to my kids that wasn't a violation of my own sense of integrity, and the result was just horrid, So you're not going to bring peace. You're going to bring your own internal dissolution, and that'll break down the bonds of fellowship rather than build them up. So what you need to do, in my judgment, right, is find a way to practice your Catholic faith with great sensitivity, right, to where your family's coming from, great patience, great love, great magnanimity. Guess who is going to have to be the virtuous person here? You, right?
That's right.
They're going to dig their heels in, perhaps take a superior attitude, perhaps take a condescending attitude, perhaps become critical, become narrow-minded, become ideologically possessed, heap abuse on you, and your job is to turn the other cheek.
Right.
Wow. That's not a part of Christian spirituality, is it? Yeah, I mean, this may be the path that right now in your life that God uses to sanctify you and them. And, the reason I'm at EWTN right now, this is the reason. I had to find a place I could go to confession where my wife would not know. I only knew to go to confession at the parish on weekends, and she would catch me if I did that. But I could come here. I live 5 miles away from the network. I could come here during the week, go to the St. Michael Hall, and these Franciscan priests could hear my confession, and nobody would know. So, I mean, it's like, I understand, all right? But guess what happened? I mean, this isn't on me. This is the Lord's grace. I kept going, and I kept going, secretly at times. I met Father Angelo Shaughnessy, Capuchin Franciscan, who was the father guardian of the MFVA here at EWTN. He was a holy man, very holy man, and much holier than I was. Wonderful confessor. And I said, if anybody can reach my wife, it'd be this guy. You say, it's not my holiness. Wasn't me. Wasn't my brilliant apologetics. And I said, would you go to confession to Father Angelus? Heck no. Leave me alone, said my wife. I kept at her, and I kept at her, and I kept at her. She said, finally, look, just to get you off my case, I'll go once and never again. So she goes once. Then she goes twice. Then she goes 3 times. The next thing I know, she's praying the rosary in the middle of the night. I leave town on a business trip. I call her up and say, what are you doing? She says, I took the kids to daily mass. And I had to, reattach my jaw, And then she's like, get up, we're going to the network because we're going to go pray the Liturgy of the Hours, the Divine Office with the friars at 4:30. And then I'm like, who is this woman? Where did she come from? Yeah. Years later, I asked her, I said, what did Father Angelus say to you in that confessional that brought you around? And she said, he told me something no one had ever told me before. He told me my suffering has meaning. Now, that's what she needed to hear. I wasn't the one saying that. Let's do all this fancy apologetics. It's not what she needed. She needed someone to validate her suffering. He had the pastoral skill and holiness to do that. So my point is, the solution may come someplace you don't expect it to. Your job is just fidelity, charity, hope, fortitude, perseverance, and God will bring the victory.
Absolutely. Does it every time. Ray, thank you so much for your call. By the way, if I can just add this personal note, if you want to know the whole story about David and his struggles with all this, you may want to check out his great book, The Catholic Church Saved My Marriage. It is available from EWTNRC.com. EWTNRC.com. It's a great book, David, by the way.
Thanks, Tom.
I don't know if I've ever said that, but it really is a great book. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you so much.
Good stuff. In a moment here on EWTN's Call to Communion, we're going to be talking with Susan in Pensacola. She's listening on Sirius XM. We'll also be talking with Jeff checking in from Anchorage, Alaska, listening to one of our great stations there, 94.1 FM. Also, Dan in Buffalo, listening on the Domestic Church Media. And we've got lots more straight ahead on this edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. David is researching an upcoming question, I can tell right now. You can also check out this email address, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com, if you're watching us on TV today and you would like to participate as well. So again, we'll be talking with Dan in Buffalo, Susan in Pensacola, Florida, also Jeff in Anchorage, Alaska, and we've got one line open for you right now, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. It's Call to Communion here on EWTN. Do stay with us.
Al Cresta. The secular press just doesn't get our story. They don't even understand it. And so it's incumbent upon us to get the story straight and get the story out.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
Hey Alexa, how many ways can I get EWTN?
You can get EWTN on television, via cable and satellite, on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, and Google Play. You can get EWTN Radio in your car on Sirius XM Channel 130 and on the go on any mobile device with the EWTN app. And here's the best news. Now you can get EWTN's great programming on Me.
Father John Riccardo.
In our culture, the commandments are looked at as burdens because, for many of us, we only learn the commandments by rote memorization. Well, the commandments change drastically when a child or an adult learns that, do you know where the Israelites were before they got the commandments? They were slaves in a desert making bricks. God dramatically rescued them from there, released them from the tyranny of Pharaoh, through great signs and wonders, brought them out of that land of affliction, parted the Red Sea so that they could go through it and escape Pharaoh's armies that were pursuing, brought them into the Promised Land after feeding them with manna in the desert, and on the way to the Promised Land stopped at Sinai and gave them the Ten Commandments. Now, if you really think God wanted to keep us in slavery and that the commandments are restrictions to our freedom, he would have just left them in Egypt, to then bring them to a mountain and say, okay, well, I really don't want you that happy.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
Hi, I'm Cy Kellett. Later today on Catholic Answers Live, Jimmy Akin, Father John Trigilio, 2 hours of open forum. Catholic Answers Live, 6 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
It is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Let's go now to Susan. Susan's listening to us in Pensacola, Florida on Sirius XM 130. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Hello, how are you?
We're doing great. What's on your mind?
Great. I wanted to ask you some questions about the incense that they have during Mass. My husband is a convert, and he's always asking me, and I really don't know what to say, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. So, the use of incense in sacred worship is something that Israel performed in the temple, and the imagery of incense emerges in the New Testament, especially in the book of Revelation, describing the Christian worship in heaven. The prayers of the saints are compared to incense in Revelation chapter 5 and Revelation chapter 8. And the point of incense is similar to the physical beautification of the church with statuary or painting or, the gold that might be used in the chalice and the ciboria and things like this. And we beautify our churches visually with sound and in the form of music, and acoustically build the church a certain kind of way. And some of the most beautiful music in the history of the world has emerged from the liturgical tradition of the Catholic Church.
Oh, yes.
And lest we leave some sense unattended, we also add the olfactory senses to the business in the use of incense. Now, all of these things are just signs. They're just tokens that call all of our senses and our emotions together in the work of worship to elevate our contemplation of God. But if you're attuned to it, right, the use of incense can call to mind the way in which the divine presence pervades all things, and it also there's a note of the holy as opposed, or the sacred as opposed to the profane.
Mm-hmm.
When you walk into a church, you say, "Oh yeah, I know that smell. That's the smell of Christian worship, right? That's the smell of Christian worship, or the sounds of Christian worship. Think about, the ringing of church bells to call the people to prayer and so forth." All of these things inculcate a sense of the distinction between the sacred and the profane, which is very helpful in obeying the injunction of St. Paul that we set our hearts not on earthly things but the things of God. And we set aside sacred spaces and beautify them in every possible way. That's an aid. That's an aid to contemplation. And another way of hallowing the profound sacredness of the activity performed in Catholic churches, which is the holy sacrifice of the Mass, the source and summit of our faith, and the presence of Christ bodily on the altar, altered in sacrifice to God the Father.
I love it personally. It is telling me, slow down, enjoy this. This means something.
I was a few weeks ago at a parish here in our diocese, St. Barnabas Parish, where I think you go, Tom.
That is our parish.
And it was there was a 24 hours for the Lord celebration that Father Vu was hosting. Invited people from all over the diocese to come participate, and they had Eucharistic adoration, confessions, and so forth, 24 hours during the day. And they were either preparing to or had just completed exposition of the Blessed Sacrament with incense. I parked my car and I was walking up the sidewalk on the outside of the church. And I could catch the incense. And I don't have a good nose, right? And I could catch the incense, 50 feet away. And I was like, oh boy, this is going to be good.
It's special. Yeah. Absolutely. Susan, thanks so much for your call. It's Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Jeff now, checking in from Anchorage, Alaska, listening on KHRM 94.1 FM. Jeff is a first-time caller. What's on your mind today, Jeff?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something you mentioned earlier, or see if you were just using hyperbole. You made the statement when you were talking about confusing the Catholic faith that Jesus came and God became man so that we could become God. And I just wanted to know, were you using hyperbole that we become God, or were you meaning that, is that part of Catholic canon, or can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, thanks. So if you look in the second letter of St. Peter, chapter 1, verse 4, the apostle says that through the promises of Christ, we become participants in the divine nature. Go read it. Look it up. I encourage you to. 2 Peter 1, 4, we become participants in the divine nature. And Christ uses this language in the Gospel of John. When the Pharisees accuse him of claiming to be God, he says, "But do not your own psalms say, I said ye were gods," if he called them gods to whom the word of God came? What of him who descended from heaven, the Son of God? And so there's an ascription of divinity, even within the Psalms, that Christ acknowledges as being true, veridical, right, in some respect.
Yeah.
In what manner, right, do we mean that we become God? Do we think, do Catholics, does sacred Scripture teach that we become one with the Godhead so that we lose our individuality and actually become the creator of the universe? No, of course not. That would be absurd. That would be more akin to Hindu monism than it would be to the Christian faith. We don't believe that at all. What we do teach, and what the Catholic faith teaches, what the Scriptures teach, is that through the grace of God, we are reborn, right? We are restored to his image and likeness. We're created in his image and likeness. We have that image effaced to a certain extent by sin. It is reformed and clarified and buffed up, so to speak, by the gift of God's grace. And we receive this deiform nature, right? God's presence dwelling in our hearts. Jesus says, if you love me and keep my commandments, my Father and I will come to you and make our dwelling with you, right? So Christ comes to dwell with us, to change us interiorly, to make us God-like. What is God's ultimate nature? It's love, it's charity. And he sheds that abroad in our hearts so that we become like God in our character. We resemble God in our character, And that qualitative change to the human person is, in the language of Scripture, deifying. Not, again, in the sense that we become literally, numerically one with the Godhead. Mm-hmm. No, that would be absurd. But we are adopted into his family and become like him.
Okay. Jeff, thanks for checking in from Anchorage. It's good to hear from you there. It's Called to Communion here on EWTN. We have a line open for you right now, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986 here on Call to Communion. We go to Dan now in Buffalo, New York, listening on Domestic Church Media. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
Greetings.
Hey, Dan.
Love the Lord all my life, and like you, came in as an adult into the fullness of the faith, Dr. Anders. I appreciate so much what you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I've been a long-time listener and just absolutely love learning more about the faith. It's new to me, 19 years, and there's something ever ancient, never knew about it, right? So my question is, the Protestants are always saying Jesus had no brothers, and I have definitely assented, or has had brothers, and I've definitely assented to all of the Marian doctrines, thanks to God's grace. But it makes me wonder why, if there's no word for cousins or brother, nephew, why does Mary run in haste to see her cousin Elizabeth?
Sure, thanks. Appreciate the question. If you permit me to say so, I think you're setting this up differently than I would set it up. All right, the Catholic doctrine does not hang on whether or not there is a Greek or Aramaic word for cousin. That's not what this hangs on. So let me go at it from a different angle. In Matthew 13, verses 55 to 57, we read Jesus' contemporaries say, "We know this guy, and we know his brothers and his sisters, and his brothers are James and Joseph." That's who they are. Then you keep reading in Matthew, and you get to chapter 27, the account of the crucifixion. And one of the people at the cross, one of the women at the cross, is a woman named Mary. Notice how all the women in Scripture are named Mary. We've got Marys all over the place.
Oh, yes.
A woman named Mary who is identified as the mother of James and Joseph. Then read John chapter 19, verse 25 and 27. And the apostle tells us that this woman named Mary, who in Matthew is identified as the mother of James and Joseph, is the wife of a man named Clopas and the sister of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So there's the relationship. The people identified as brothers in Matthew 13 are the children of Mary's sister, the wife of Clopas. But to see that, you have to compare these parallel passages, Matthew 13, Matthew 27, and Matthew 19. So you don't even have to get into the question of which Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek words are used. Mm-hmm. The relationship is already spelled out for you. We know who the brothers of Jesus were. They were his cousins by Mary, the wife of Clopas.
Yeah, that's all there is to it. Dan, thank you so much for your call. It is Called to Communion here on EWTN. 833-288-EWTN is our number, 833-288-3986. We'll get to Jeff in Northfield, Ohio in just a moment here. First of all, I want to tell you about our wonderful EWTN app. If you've not downloaded this for your phone or your mobile device, your tablet, whatever, you ought to do that. First of all, it's absolutely free. Secondly, it's got fabulous content. You can listen to EWTN. You can check out what our program schedule is, not only on radio, but also on television. You can look up all sorts of things, including audio on demand, video on demand. We've got it for you. And again, it's absolutely free. Go to EWTNapps.com. That's EWTNapps.com and download that for your phone or your mobile device. Absolutely free. Did I mention it was free, David? I think I did.
I think you did.
I think I did. Let's go now to a quick text from an anonymous listener. This person says, should a practicing Catholic husband attend Protestant services with his wife and kids?
Well, I suppose that depends on the context. I don't want to give an unqualified yay or nay to that. First of all, I mean, I'd like to know the circumstances here. Are we talking about a couple that Protestant Catholic married in the church, but the wife never agreed to practice the faith, and so she's been raising the kids Protestant? Whereas the presumption would be that they would raise the kids Catholic even if she's not Catholic. Yeah. Did the church is the husband a convert to the church, so that the family's always been Protestant and he's the one that became Catholic? I mean, there are a lot of details here that would qualify this to make sense. I mean, the principle is that we are obligated to worship God in the rites that he established, and those are the rites of the Catholic Church. It's an obligation to worship God this way. Christ said, "Do this in memory of me." We can't defect from that divine command. And we desire that our families participate with us, because that's the worship that is right and proper. That's the worship in spirit and in truth that Jesus desires. We also want to guard against the heresy of indifferentism. I do not want to convey to my children or my wife that it is indifferent whether I worship God in the Catholic Church or elsewhere. It's not indifferent. It makes a difference. And I want to protect them from some of the erroneous tendencies that are inherent in Protestant worship. Many Protestant churches place a heavy emphasis on engaging the emotions in worship and wrongly identify those emotions with the activity of the Holy Spirit, so that you leave a particularly emotional or moving or effective or well-constructed liturgy with some declaration like, "My brother wasn't the Spirit moving today." And what they mean by that is, I had a powerful emotional experience, or that was very pleasing, right? And that's very, very dangerous. That's a very dangerous conclusion to draw, because it confuses the quality of my emotional life with the activity of grace. And grace is never a sensible reality. It escapes our experience. You cannot feel the presence of grace. But in fact, grace can sometimes elicit periods of extreme darkness and a sense of abandonment that we call the dark night of the soul, that is essential to the highest levels of spiritual attainment. So I'm not saying this is true of all Protestant worship, but there's definitely a heavy tendency in many Protestant congregations to act as though proper worship will orient your emotional life in a certain key, and that's essential to having a good relationship with God, or that effective prayer has to be, with clenched fists and tears in the eyes and, head lifted to heaven and, strong declarative sentences, this kind of thing. And that's what makes prayer effective, as opposed to a heart and a will submitted to divine authority. So, I mean, there are reasons why Catholic worship is essential to a well-ordered spiritual life. It's not indifferent. So if I'm going to go, right, and I might have to go to be conciliatory, I want to go in a mode and in an expression that guards against all those possibilities as a bridge to aiming ultimately at unity in the Catholic faith. Sure. I'm not saying you can't ever go,
right,
but you can't go in a casual or indifferent way.
And it certainly doesn't excuse your Sunday obligation either.
Got to go to Mass.
Okay, very good. And we hope that's helpful for you. Thanks so much for your text. Now we're going to go to Jeff in Northfield, Ohio, checking us out today on YouTube. Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Yesterday's first reading was the famous Abraham-God covenant by sawing animals in half. And after Mass, at St. Barnabas, by the way, I headed over to the grocery store, and I watched the butcher use a gigantic, loud, powerful bandsaw to break up meat. And I got to thinking, 1800 BC, how in the world did Abraham and his buddies actually cut through bone, if indeed they actually did that? And then I started wondering, well, maybe the Genesis writer was using something from his time, was that 800 or 900 BC, and used that device to create a story telling us about the covenant. And I guess that's the question. What's your thoughts on all of that?
Thank you. I am so glad you asked this question. this is one of my favorite passages of the Bible, believe it or not. Abraham takes an animal, slices it in two, divides the pieces, and then he sits and falls into a trance, and he has an experience of a theophany. That's a visible representation of God's presence that is not God's presence, like the burning bush. God is not a burning bush, but he uses a burning bush to make his manifest presence known to Moses. And there is a theophany of a smoking fire pot that seemingly levitates and kind of passes between these pieces, and then God speaks to Abraham and redeclares his covenant, and says he's going to be faithful forever. What on earth is going on?
It's quite fascinating.
What on earth is going on? I'll tell you what's going on. Now, I don't have much to say about the techniques of ancient butchery, right? I mean, they had tools and they knew how to hack up animals, all right? And if you read the descriptions of sacrificial worship in the temple, it's pretty clear they knew how to divide up animals, all right? But I'm not a butcher, and I'm a vegetarian. I don't even go in for that anymore, I've sliced my share of chicken breasts, which are not too tough, but these days it's just melons and...
Kale doesn't put up too much of a fight.
Kale doesn't put up too much of a fight. Okay. So I don't really care about that question, but I am fascinated by this passage. Jeremiah 34:18. Jeremiah 34:18. This is the key. Therefore, all right, those who have violated my covenant and have not fulfilled the terms of the covenant they made before me, I will treat like the calf that they cut in two and then walked between its pieces. All right, so in Jeremiah, we are privy to an ancient covenant ceremony. We have the explanation for an ancient covenant ceremony. The covenants of the Near East, ancient Near East, were suzerainty covenants, a lord and a vassal, and the lesser party, the vassal in the covenant treaty, would slice an animal in two and then call down a curse upon himself and say, if I violate the terms of this covenant, be it unto me as done to this animal. May you slice me in half. Yeah. Right? That's the solemnity with which I'm making this bond, and I'm binding myself by this sacred act of this sacrifice, and I pass between the pieces to identify with the sacrificial victim and call down on myself this particular curse if I should violate the terms.
Okay.
Here's what's fascinating about Jeremiah 15. Abraham's not the guy going through the pieces. Abraham's not the guy going through the pieces. It's the theophany that's going through the pieces. It is as if God were saying, if I, God, violate the terms of this covenant, may it be done to me as was done to this animal, this slaughtered beast.
Right.
Well, God never violates the terms of the covenant. Man does. And guess what happens? God is the sacrificial victim. Wow. The crucifixion of Christ is the unanticipated fulfillment of, unanticipated in one sense, right? Like Abraham couldn't never have fathomed how literally God was making this covenant with him, right? God bears the sacrificial burden created by man's disobedience. All of this presaged in Genesis 15. And as well, I mean, so many times. I mean, the account of Isaac, the sacrifice of Isaac, I mean, it's just Christological typology after Christological typology in the Old Testament. All of it pointing to Jesus.
Fascinating. Jeff, thanks so much for your call. It's Called to Communion here on EWTN. Karen is listening in Michigan on Beriga Radio. She's a first-time caller. Karen, what's on your mind today?
Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I was away from the church for quite a few years after I got out of high school. And we recently went back to the church about 5 years ago. And I live with my mother, and we both go to church. A 92-year-old mother, we both go to church every day.
Okay.
And my 25-year-old son recently got out of college and moved back home. And he sees how peaceful and happy we are that we go to church. And I've never pushed it on him. He was baptized when he was small, but I never went to church with him. And he asks, he's 25, he asked the question the other day, what is faith? How do you get faith?
Great, wonderful question. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So faith is belief that another person is reliable. That's what faith is. And we all exercise faith all the time, every day. When my wife tells me something that I cannot independently verify, she might say, for example, I need you to pick the kids up from school at 2 o'clock. I don't know that on my own authority, but she's told me, but I believe her. When she said, pick them up at 2, I better be there, you know, because I trust her. She's trustworthy. Mm-hmm. Faith is reliance on the trustworthy evidence of another, or the trustworthy word of another. In this case, we're relying on the testimony of God, God's own testimony about himself that's given to us in the person of Jesus especially, and also the scriptures and sacred tradition. Why should we? Why should we have this faith? Why should we consider it to be credible? Well, Christ demonstrated that he's trustworthy, demonstrated his divine authority, in particular by rising from the dead, which is an historical fact and can be investigated and tested, and we can know that it's true. And we can see the fruit of that resurrection in the fulfillment of prophecy. And we could, if we had more time, I could run through all the prophecies that Jesus fulfilled and continues to fill to this day in the power of the Catholic Church present people's lives to transform them from darkness and sin to holiness is another manifest evidence that Jesus is reliable and trustworthy. So faith is simply the reasonable, it's not a jump in the dark, it's a reasonable reliance on what God has told us about himself in the person of his Son, Jesus, and the church that he founded. That's what faith is. Now, how does one get faith? Well, at one level, faith is a gift. It's a supernatural gift. Mm-hmm. But there are things we can do to prepare for the gift and place ourselves in its path, so to speak. One of them would be to investigate the reasons for faith. And there are reasons to have faith. Some of the ones I've already listed, the motives of credibility, like the miracles of Christ and his resurrection and of the church and the fulfillment of prophecy. These things are motives of belief. The whole work of apologetics, Catholic apologetics, and 10,000 books on Catholic apologetics that he might want to read that show us the reasonableness of faith. All right, so get a hold of some good works of Catholic apologetics. That's a good place to start. Even philosophy can be of help here. Mm-hmm. Another way is to begin praying, to begin asking God for enlightenment and for the gift of faith. And look, people who have had no faith whatsoever at all. I'm thinking of John C. Wright as an example. He's an atheist science fiction writer who adamantly did not believe in God, but said he was open-minded enough to give it a shot. So he said, God, I don't believe in you, but if you're around, you better show me I've done my duty, signing off. Well, you go read his biography, you'll see what the results of that were. In his life, they were rather astonishing. Wow. Lots of atheists have put God to the test and been surprised by the results. So pray. Associate with people who have faith. Gerald Manley Hopkins, the Jesuit poet, once asked by someone who was struggling with faith, he said, give alms. Give alms. Start doing the acts of faith, right? Behaving in a way that would dispose you to openness, to divine revelation. But above all, ask. Ask God for the gift of faith. So lots of things we can do to put ourselves in the path of the mystery of faith. Believing God because he ought to be believed.
Dr. David Anders, thank you, my friend.
Thanks, John. Oh, you're not John, you're Tom. Thanks, Tom.
I am Tom.
Right.
And I will see you next time here on EWTN's Call to Communion.
This is Father Larry Richards. Do you want to know how to bring people to Jesus Christ? Well, find out next on Open Line Thursday on EWTN Radio.
Now there's a fast and easy way to get in touch with EWTN. The EWTN Everything number. Call 1-800-447-EWTN to get the latest information on programming, special events, pilgrimages, and more. Our EWTN Family Viewer Services representatives are ready to help you with whatever your needs may be. The EWTN Everything number. 1-800-447-EWTN.